Verse 5. I think we might prefer gathering stones over casting them away. So casting stones in this context is referring to, in Israel, one of the war tactics they would have is to make it impossible for people to plant crops. And what they would do is they'd take stones and they would cast them into their fields so that they could no longer plant, because the stones kind of make it impossible for the roots to take, and it's impossible. They have to get all the stones out before they can plant. So to cast stones, negative. To gather them is positive. That to gather stones means that we have peace. We now have the ability to go out and gather these stones because I'm no longer having arrows fired at me, and I can gather them and plant my crops, and we have peace. We would all prefer perhaps embracing over refraining from embracing. Friendships don't last forever. It's not a permanent relationship. And this is a lesson that I learned right as I was coming out of high school. I had a friend who, she didn't have a good family life. I'm not sure about the details, but for some reason, in her teenage mind, she did not get the affection that she wanted from her parents. And so she sought it in her friends. And it was a trial at times, but we were there for her. But towards the end of high school, we were starting to go out. We were starting to go to schools. We were starting to make other friends. And she grew really frustrated and agitated about this. And it was here that my stepmother, who's a very wise woman anyway, she said this to her, and I thought it was really strange that friendships are not a permanent relationship. It's temporary. And that we encourage one another, we care for one another, and we help one another during a season of life, and then we move on. Sometimes life just pulls us apart. Sometimes things happen, right? But that is a temporary relationship. It's similar with children. Having children, our children, that's a temporary relationship. That my son is my son. He'll always be my son. But that relationship doesn't stay the same, and it shouldn't. That when he gets married, he will cling to his wife, that they will be one. And if I try to hold him as in the same kind of parent relationship, I'm going to drive him away. And either that, or I'll put a wedge between him and his wife. Right? This is a temporary relationship. The only permanent relationship I think we have is a marriage relationship, because I am saying that I will remain with you until death. You specifically, not you. I'm sorry. In verse 6, we see to lose or to seek, right? I think I rather seek than lose, but if I'm seeking something, it's probably because I lost it to begin with. So I'm not actually sure which one I would prefer, but there are times when we lose things. There are times we go seeking them out, hoping to find it again. That's funny. We like to sow over tearing, to repair what was ripped. So here's another situation in Israel where in times of mourning and times of grief or of repentance, Israelites would tear their clothes. It's a sign of grief. I think, I'm trying to think of a good situation. I know that in Nineveh, they do this in repentance when Jonah preaches God's judgment towards them. But when the grief has ended, or rather when it has subsided, it may no longer be gone, but it's no longer debilitating. It's no longer weighing so heavily on you that you can't think of life again. That we instead take it as something that can inform our perceptions, but then we sew our garments and we look forward to a life that might be changed, but it is still life. To keep silent and to speak. I think this one depends on your personality, right? On whether or not you'd rather be silent or speak. But there are definitely clear times in which we should probably keep silent, and probably more often than we realize. But then there are also times when something must be said. That there are injustices in this world that need to be spoken to by people who understand the gospel and understand the value of human beings, right? There's a time to speak. But then there's also a time to be silent. To love and to hate. We love the idea of love, and we hate the idea of hate. However, there are times when both are a reality. There are even times when love is the fuel for hate. And we refer to this as betrayal. Sometimes the amount of love that you have for an individual is kind of what you have hate in equal amounts when that betrayal happens. Hatred is a sin. It is a sin, but it is still a reality. Last, we have war and peace. We love peace. So much so that we will often avoid war and cling to peace only for the war to be greater than it would have if we had just confronted the situation to begin with. This is true of our world. I'm thinking of Neville Chamberlain. I don't know if you're familiar with who Neville Chamberlain is. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain right before World War II started. I had a professor, I took a World War II class in college, and my professor called him the greatest nincompoop of history. But he, thinking that he can solve the world's problem, went to Hitler to get peace from him. He came home from that meeting and he said, "Peace in our time. I've solved this Hitler problem." Only for Hitler to seize even more power, and World War II was probably bigger than it would have been if they had confronted him then. This is also true of everyday life. If we avoid conflict or appease people who seek power or authority over others, or who are causing unnecessary conflict, then we often feed the conflict instead of promoting peace. Peace comes from dealing with conflict when it arises, to go to war when necessary so that peace can come. But the opposite can also be true, right? There are people who see war everywhere, and they don't know how to embrace peace when they have it. But what is Solomon saying to us with this poem? That time is meaningless, it adds up to nothing? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every positive has a negative. In the end, if you stand back and look, there seems to be no point at all. So what is there for us? What is the point of it all? Why? And Solomon asks a very similar question in verse 9. So, what gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So in a way, we're back to our original question. In chapter 1, verse 3, he says, "What has man gained from all the toil which he toiled under the sun?" We're also back to the same question that he asked, that we looked at last week, that I've seen everything that God has given to the sons of man to be busy with. Last time he said it is an unhappy business. But here he kind of changes what he's saying, that instead he says God has made everything beautiful in its time. But I think we struggle with this. Especially those of us who have experienced any sort of tragedy or suffering, that we struggle with this idea, how can God make some things beautiful? We may even look at this and grow angry and ask why? Why would a good God allow these things to happen? What did I do to deserve this? Why does God hate me so much? Why would he take her from me when she was so wonderful? We feel the depth and the pain of the curse of sin and death, and perhaps because we become overwhelmed with debilitating sadness. Sometimes we grow in depression in this. We grow into sadness. We don't even know how to come out of it. Like it's a hole of darkness that we can't even walk out of. All of a sudden, our dreams are revealed to be what they are. Dreams, idols. Others may grow callous and relinquish responsibility. I've known quite a few of these. They may say something like, "God has caused all of this for your good," no matter how horrifying. He did this to you for your good. How dare you question his sovereignty? Still others grow weary instead. We struggle with this. We look at our circumstances and we try to understand why these things have to be. We either grow in our arrogance and try to explain everything away, trying to remove all the mystery of this, our hearts hardened to the pain around us, of the people around us, or we resign ourselves to not knowing. We don't even try to seek for truth, because what's the point? We long to know, though. God has put within us eternity to know what's going on in these times and seasons. How can the death of a child ever be considered beautiful? Right? How could slavery, we look back at slavery, or even the current sex slave trade, right? How can slavery ever be considered beautiful? God has put it into our hearts to long for eternity, to see beyond the now with its trials and difficulties. We imagine what an afterlife would be like because we have trouble even imagining a future where we aren't conscious entities. We don't even know what it's, we can't even imagine non-existence. Like, I just think of darkness, but I'm like, no, because I'm thinking of being aware of darkness, so that doesn't even work. We step back and we try to see all the time with clarity, but we can't even understand history. We can't look to the future. And we can't even see now clearly. If you look carefully at our passage here, though, I think we could find hope. We cannot choose our times or our seasons. We don't get to choose when we live or when we die. We don't even really get to choose when it's time to plant and when it's time to harvest or when it's time to pluck up. But we do get to choose how we go about doing those things. We do get to choose our posture in those times. God can see it all. God sits on his throne in all wisdom and power and glory, and he has said that he will make all things beautiful in its time. But how do we live currently with such frustration? What purpose does it serve? Why would God do this? Glad you asked. Verse 12. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. If we cannot control the times and seasons we enter into, then how do we live? How can we walk this world when something bad could happen at any moment? Solomon tells us, he says, be joyful, do good, eat and drink and take pleasure in all your toil. This is God's gift to man. God has given us the opportunity to enjoy the moments we have, no matter how seemingly small they are. To enjoy and to do good. This is easier said than done. Our world is full of sorrow, full of trial, and full of pain. How can I enjoy the moments I have when my sin haunts me, my pain surrounds me, my trials are burying me, and my future terrifies me? Verse 14. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. God is in command. He is seated on his throne. He has established certain times and seasons, and he uses each one to either frustrate us or to develop us.